Arizona has towns the tourism board would very much prefer you never search for. This is a countdown of 11 real towns scattered across the Arizona desert, and every one of them comes with a body count, a curse, or a ghost story. The locals repeat just a little too fast. Some are full-on ghost towns, empty and rotting under the sun. A few are still open for business, which is arguably worse. We're talking about a town where wild donkeys own the sidewalks and the people just accept it. A cave whose legend supposedly cursed an entire stretch of highway. A gold mine that has quietly killed more treasure hunters than anyone wants to admit. And a hillside town that literally slid downhill and dragged its own jail along with it. If you make it all the way to number 1 without subscribing, that's between you and the ghosts, and trust me, they're keeping a list. Let's count it down. Number 11, Oatman. Way out in the Black Mountains near the California border, sits a crumbling mining town on Old Route 66. And the first thing you'll notice is that you are not the most important species here. Wild burros run the entire town. They walk down the middle of the main street, they shove their heads into open car windows, and they will absolutely mug you for a carrot with zero remorse. These donkeys are the descendants of pack animals that old prospectors turned loose when the gold dried up, and roughly a century later, their great-great-grandchildren owned the place. The humans just quietly accepted second-class citizenship. The burros are the cute part. The name is where it gets grim. Oatman is named after Olive Oatman, a young pioneer girl whose family was attacked on the trail in the 1850s. She was taken captive, and years later she was returned carrying a distinctive blue tattoo across her chin that stayed with her for the rest of her life. That is the woman this cheerful little tourist town is named after. The town boomed on gold, produced a fortune, and then all but died when the new highway bypassed it completely. What's left is a main drag of weathered wooden storefronts, staged gunfights in the street every afternoon, and the Oatman Hotel, where Clark Gable and Carol Lombard supposedly spent their wedding night back in 1939. Staff and guests report flickering lights, cold spots, and the sound of someone laughing in an empty upstairs room. Locals even have a name for one of the resident spirits. They call him Odie. Here's the real estate angle, because that's what we do here. You can wander the old buildings and imagine owning a piece of a genuine Route 66 ghost town, and it's cheaper than you'd think. The catch is the donkeys, the ghosts, the summer heat that turns the street into a skillet, and the fact that your nearest real grocery store is a serious drive through open desert. Charming? Absolutely. Livable? We'll let you decide. But Oatman is the friendly warm-up, because the next town buried its lawmen faster than it could hire them. Number 10. Canyon Diablo. If Tombstone had a reputation for being tough, Canyon Diablo laughed at it. This railroad town sprang up in the 1880s on the edge of a deep gorge in northern Arizona, thrown together almost overnight when the crews building the railroad got stranded waiting for a bridge. What you get when you strand a few hundred rough men in the middle of nowhere with money to spend is exactly what you'd expect. The town filled up with saloons, gambling halls, and a main street the locals grimly nicknamed Hell Street. The stories that survive are hard to believe. Canyon Diablo supposedly burned through town marshals at a genuinely alarming rate. As the legend goes, the very first lawman lasted only a few hours before he was killed, and the men who followed didn't do much better. Robberies, shootouts, and knife fights were a nightly event, and the town's boot hill filled up with men who died young and died violently. No church, no school, no law that ever stuck, and a graveyard busier than any of the businesses. When the railroad bridge was finally finished and the crews moved on, Canyon Diablo emptied out as fast as it had appeared. Today there's almost nothing left. A few crumbling stone foundations, some scattered debris, and the wind moving through a canyon that has soaked up a truly grim amount of human misery. It sits not far from Meteor Crater, so you've got a giant hole punched in the earth by a space rock in one direction and a ghost town full of murdered outlaws in the other. Northern Arizona has range. There's no real estate pitch here because there's nothing left to buy and nothing sane left to build. Canyon Diablo is the kind of place that reminds you, some towns don't fade away peacefully, they just run out of people willing to die in them. And if a lawless railroad town sounds bleak, wait until you meet the ghost town hiding right next to one of the most cursed mountain ranges in America. Number 9. Goldfield. Just outside of Phoenix, at the foot of the jagged Superstition Mountains, sits Goldfield, a gold mining town with one of the shortest and most dramatic lives in Arizona history. In the 1890s, Goldfield exploded almost overnight when miners struck a rich vein of gold. Within a few years, the town had saloons, a schoolhouse, a boarding house, a general store, and a population absolutely certain it had found paradise in the desert. Then the vein did something cruel. It hit a geological fault line, and the gold seam shifted, splitting apart deep underground. The miners chased it, dug deeper, spent everything they had, and the town that had roared to life practically vanished inside of 5 years. Goldfield died so fast that people barely had time to leave. Today, Goldfield has been rebuilt as a ghost town attraction, all wooden sidewalks and old West storefronts leaning hard into the eerie history. But the truly unsettling part isn't the town. It's what looms right behind it. The Superstition Mountains are one of the most legend-soaked ranges in the entire country, and we'll get much deeper into why later on this list. For now, just know that people who wander into those mountains looking for gold have a long, well-documented habit of never coming back. If you like the idea of desert living with a side of history, the area around Goldfield and Apache Junction is genuinely popular with retirees and dreamers. The views are unreal, the sunsets look computer-generated, and the property comes with the world's most ominous backyard. Just maybe don't go hiking alone. Speaking of dying quickly, our next town didn't even bother with gold. It just had a jail, a cemetery, and a whole lot of bad luck. Number 8. Gleeson. Down in the southeastern corner of Arizona, in the same rugged county as Tombstone, sits the ghost town of Gleeson. This was a copper and turquoise mining town that peaked in the early 1900s, with a couple thousand residents, a hospital, a school, saloons, and all the trappings of a place that thought it would last forever. It did not. A massive fire tore through Gleeson in 1912 and gutted much of the town. It was rebuilt, but the mines eventually played out, the people drifted away, and Gleeson slowly crumbled back into the desert. What makes it stick in your memory is what's still standing. The old Gleeson jail is still there, a squat little building of thick stone and iron bars, restored just enough to feel genuinely wrong when you walk up to it. Standing alone in the desert silence, that jail radiates a very specific dread, like it's still waiting for someone to lock inside. Scattered around the town site, you'll find the ruins of the hospital, the collapsed remains of old buildings, and a cemetery on the hill where the graves tell you everything about how hard life was out here. Illness, mining accidents, and violence took people young. The wind is constant, the isolation is total, and the whole place carries that heavy quiet that only exists where a lot of people used to live and suddenly don't. Real estate-wise, this is deep, remote, off-grid Arizona. People do live scattered around the region, chasing cheap land and total privacy. And you'll get privacy in exchange for driving forever for anything you need and sharing your zip code with an actual restored ghost town jail. If your dream is being genuinely, completely alone, this desert delivers. Quick pause before we climb higher. If you're enjoying this creepy little tour, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. We do this kind of dark, weird deep dive into American towns every single week, and I promise the next few stops are the ones that keep you up tonight. Because our next town has a tree in it, and people used to hang from it. Number 7. Vulture City. This one has a landmark you don't forget. Out in the desert near Wickenburg sits Vulture City, the ghost town that grew up around the Vulture mine, one of the richest gold mines in Arizona history. A German immigrant named Henry Wickenburg discovered the gold here in the 1860s, and the mine went on to pull a genuine fortune out of the ground, tens of millions of dollars in gold over its lifetime. Where there's that much gold, there are people willing to steal it. And in the Old West, there were consequences. The centerpiece of Vulture City is the hanging tree. According to the legend passed down over the years, roughly 18 men were hanged from the branches of that single ironwood tree. Most of them miners caught pocketing gold ore and trying to smuggle it out. The practice even had a name back then. It was called high grading, and at Vulture City, the punishment for it was swift and permanent. That tree is still standing today, gnarled and dead and leaning over the dusty ground, and visitors consistently describe an unmistakable heaviness in the air around it. The rest of the town is remarkably preserved. You can walk through the old assay office, the mess hall, the blacksmith shop, and the bunkhouses, all frozen in time. It's one of the more complete ghost towns in the state, which also makes it one of the most atmospheric. People who take the tours regularly report cold spots, the feeling of being watched, and objects that refuse to stay where they're put. For a place with a hanging tree as its main attraction, none of that is surprising. Vulture City is privately owned and runs as a historic site, so you're not exactly house hunting here. But it stands as a monument to a very Arizona truth. The desert made men rich, and then the desert, or the men around them, made them pay. And that's still one of the tamer stories on this list. Because next up is the town that refused to die and filled an entire graveyard proving it. Number 6. Tombstone. You knew this one was coming. Tombstone is the most famous of Arizona's Old West towns, nicknamed the town Too Tough to Die, and it earned that reputation in blood. Founded in the late 1870s after a prospector struck silver in ground, people warned him would only get him a tombstone. The town exploded into one of the wildest boom towns in the country. At its peak, Tombstone had thousands of residents, dozens of saloons, gambling halls, and a level of casual violence that's genuinely hard to picture today. It's most famous for the gunfight near the OK Corral in 1881, the 30-second burst of gunfire between the Earp brothers, Doc Holliday, and the Clanton and McClory Cowboys that's been retold in 100 movies. 3 men died in half a minute in a narrow lot, and the feud that followed left even more bodies in the dirt. All of those men, and plenty more, ended up on the hill outside town at Boot Hill Graveyard, where the hand-painted grave markers read like grim little punchlines. One famously reads, "Here lies Lester Moore. 4 slugs from a 44, no les, no more." Then there's the Birdcage Theater, once a saloon, gambling hall, and, let's be polite, a business with rooms upstairs. It's said that more than 24 people were killed inside its walls, and today it's considered one of the most haunted buildings in America. Staff and visitors report apparitions in old-fashioned clothing, disembodied voices, the smell of cigar smoke, and the faint sound of music and laughter drifting through rooms that have been empty for well over a century. What separates Tombstone from the other stops on this list is simple. It never actually died. Real people live there today, running shops and restaurants and giving tours in period costume. You can genuinely buy property in a town where the graveyard is a tourist attraction and the main event is a reenacted shootout. It's a working community built right on top of a whole lot of unfunny history. That's Arizona for you. Our next town isn't nearly as lively. In fact, it's famous for exactly one thing: murder. Number 5, Ruby. Tucked away in the mountains near the Mexico border, down a long dirt road most people never find, sits Ruby, one of the best preserved ghost towns in the American Southwest. Ruby was a mining town pulling gold, silver, lead, and zinc out of the surrounding hills. And at its peak in the 1930s, it had a couple thousand residents, a school, and one of the busiest mining operations in the state. But Ruby isn't remembered for its ore. It's remembered for the Ruby murders. In the 1920s, the town's general store, which doubled as the post office, became the site of a series of brutal robberies. The store owners were murdered. New owners took over the store. They were murdered too. The killings were tied to bandits crossing up from the border, and the sheer viciousness of the crimes made national headlines and triggered one of the largest manhunts in Arizona history at the time. For a tiny remote mining town, Ruby earned a reputation soaked in blood. The mines closed in the 40s and Ruby was abandoned. But because of how isolated it is, it never got looted or torn down like most ghost towns. The schoolhouse still stands. The old mine buildings are still there. The jail, the houses, the mill, all of it frozen in a remarkable state of decay. Today, Ruby is privately owned, and you can actually get permission to visit, walking through a town where the silence is absolute and the history is genuinely disturbing. There's a small lake, a lot of wildlife, and a stillness that visitors describe as beautiful and deeply unsettling at the same time. You cannot casually buy a house in Ruby, but you can stand in the doorway of a store where multiple people were murdered nearly 100 years ago and feel the temperature of the whole place drop. Ruby is proof that remote and peaceful are not the same word. Now we're getting into the top of the list, and this is where things stop being merely creepy and start feeling genuinely cursed. Real quick, if you're still with me this far in, you already know this channel isn't like the others. Tap that like button and go ahead and subscribe, because number 3 changes the energy of this whole video and I don't want you to miss it. All right, number 4. Apache Junction and the Superstition Mountains. On the eastern edge of the Phoenix metro area sits the town of Apache Junction, and on paper it's a totally normal, fast-growing Arizona community full of retirees, hikers, and affordable homes. But it lives in the shadow of the Superstition Mountains, and those mountains have been swallowing people for over a century. The legend at the center of it all is the Lost Dutchman's gold mine. The story goes that a German immigrant named Jacob Waltz discovered an incredibly rich gold deposit somewhere in the Superstitions in the 1800s, told almost no one where it was, and took the secret to his grave in 1891. Ever since, treasure hunters have poured into those mountains, convinced they can find it. Many of them have died trying. People have vanished on those slopes, been found dead from heat and falls, and in a few genuinely chilling cases, been discovered with gunshot wounds or missing their heads entirely. The mountain has a body count that stretches across generations. Long before the gold seekers, the Apache considered these mountains sacred ground, and some traditions held that the area was a doorway that should not be disturbed. Add in the brutal terrain, the flash floods, the heat that kills fast, and the maze of canyons where GPS gets unreliable, and you have a place that has earned every ounce of its ominous reputation. Search and rescue teams know the Superstitions well. They get called out there a lot. And here's the strange part for a real estate channel. Apache Junction is booming. The homes are relatively affordable by Arizona standards. The desert scenery is jaw-dropping, and thousands of people happily retire in the direct shadow of a mountain range famous for killing gold hunters. The view from the porch is spectacular. Just resist the urge to go looking for anything up there. Which brings us to number 3. And I need you to actually pay attention to this one, because it's the stop that gives this entire list its reputation. Number 3. Two Guns. Out on old Route 66 in northern Arizona, near that same canyon Diablo we talked about earlier, sit the burned-out ruins of a town called Two Guns. And the reason this is the shocking one isn't the crumbling gas station or the empty stone buildings. It's what's underneath them. Two Guns was built directly on top of the Apache Death Cave. Here's the legend, and it's a heavy one. Back in 1878, a band of Apache raiders reportedly attacked a Navajo camp, killing nearly everyone. When a Navajo war party tracked the raiders, the men seemed to vanish into the desert. The pursuers eventually realized the Apache were hiding in an underground cave. So the Navajo built fires at the cave's mouth, sealed off the only exit, and kept the flames burning. As the story is told, roughly 42 Apache warriors died inside that cave, suffocated and burned. Before the end, the trapped men are said to have cursed the ground itself, and everyone who would ever try to profit from it. Now here's where it gets genuinely unsettling, because in the decades that followed, people did try to profit from it, and the pattern is hard to ignore. In the 1920s, a man opened a roadside attraction at Two Guns, actually charging tourists to walk through the death cave and selling Apache bones and skulls as souvenirs. His business partnership collapsed into a shooting. The town's own name comes from a violent dispute. Over the years, Two Guns burned down, repeatedly. There was a roadside zoo built there where animals died. There were fires, financial ruin, and a steady drumbeat of misfortune that locals and travelers alike began pinning on one thing: the curse. Today, Two Guns is an abandoned wreck of scorched concrete and graffiti on the side of the interstate, and it remains one of the eeriest places in Arizona. People who stop there describe an immediate physical sense of unease, a feeling that they're not supposed to be there. Whether you believe in curses or not, the documented history of this single spot is a relentless chain of fire, death, and ruin, stacked on top of a mass grave. That's why number 3 is the one people remember. If that story rattled you even a little, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this video reach more people who love this stuff. And believe it or not, we've still got 2 towns left that go even further. Number 2. Bisbee. On the surface, modern Bisbee looks like a charming, artsy mountain town, all colorful houses stacked up a steep canyon, quirky galleries, and coffee shops. But Bisbee is built on one of the richest copper mines in history and one of the darkest chapters in Arizona's labor history, and the town wears its ghosts openly. For decades, Bisbee was a booming copper town centered on the Copper Queen mine, pulling billions of dollars of metal out of the mountain. That kind of money came with brutal working conditions, and in 1917, the town became the site of the Bisbee deportation. During a miners' strike, around 1,200 striking workers were rounded up at gunpoint, loaded into cattle cars, hauled out into the New Mexico desert, dumped there with no food or water, and warned never to return. It was one of the ugliest acts of the era, and it happened right here on these pretty streets. The town's crown jewel is the Copper Queen Hotel, a grand old building from 1902 that's widely considered one of the most haunted hotels in the state. It's said to be home to at least 3 regular spirits, including a woman named Julia, who reportedly drifts through the halls, a young boy who plays in the stairwells, and an old bearded man who appears in the bar. The hotel takes it so seriously that it keeps a logbook where guests write down their paranormal encounters, and it is absolutely full. People report being touched, hearing voices, and watching objects move on their own. For our purposes, Bisbee is the rare, creepy town you can genuinely move to, and plenty of people have. It's become an artist haven with a real community, but the homes are perched on nearly vertical hillsides. The old mine tailings loom over everything, and you're living in a town where the past is very much still present, sometimes literally. Affordable, gorgeous, and haunted. Pick your priorities. But one town in Arizona out-haunts all of them. A place that calls itself the wickedest town in the West and America's most haunted. Number 1 is next. Number 1. Jerome. Clinging to the side of Cleopatra Hill at 5,000 feet, overlooking the Verde Valley, sits Jerome, a town that has earned 2 nicknames that tell you everything. In its heyday, it was called the wickedest town in the West. Today, it markets itself, accurately, as one of the most haunted places in America. Jerome was a copper mining boomtown that at its peak in the early 1900s held around 15,000 residents, along with a red light district, opium dens, saloons on every corner, and a murder rate that made it notorious across the country. The mining beneath the town was so aggressive, with so much dynamite blasting, that the ground itself became unstable, and here's the detail: people love. The town jail literally broke free from its foundation and slid more than 200 feet down the hillside, where it still sits today, crooked and abandoned. A building designed to hold people in place could not stay in place itself. When the mines finally closed in the 1950s, Jerome's population collapsed from 15,000 to fewer than 100, nearly becoming a full ghost town before artists and free spirits moved in and revived it. But the dead apparently stayed. The centerpiece is the Jerome Grand Hotel, which was originally the United Verde Hospital, where many people died over the decades. Guests and staff report the sounds of coughing and labored breathing in empty rooms, an old woman appearing at bedsides, and the smell of cigars and antiseptic where there's no source. Elsewhere in town, the ghost of a woman named Sammy Dean, a working girl who was murdered and whose killer was never caught, is said to still wander looking for justice. Here's the beautiful, eerie contradiction. Jerome is a fully functioning town today, packed with wineries, galleries, restaurants, and some of the most sought-after historic real estate in Arizona. People pay a premium to live in a place that openly advertises its ghosts. It's romantic and gorgeous and genuinely unnerving. A town that slid halfway down a mountain, refused to die twice, and kept every single one of its ghosts. If any place on this list deserves the top spot, it's the wicked, haunted, tilted little town of Jerome. So there it is, 11 Arizona towns where the sunshine is hiding something. From the donkey-ruled streets of Oatman, to the murdered lawmen of Canyon Diablo, to that scorched, cursed patch of ground at Two Guns, this state has a real talent for the dark and the strange. And the wildest part is that most of these places are still right there, waiting on the map for anyone brave or foolish enough to visit. If your dream retirement plan involves cheap desert land and total peace and quiet, just remember that in Arizona, quiet doesn't always mean empty. Sometimes it just means everyone who used to be there is still around in a different way. If you made it all the way to number 1, you're exactly the kind of person this channel is for, so go ahead and subscribe. We dig into the best, the strangest, and the darkest places to live in America every single week, and there's a whole playlist of towns like these waiting for you right now. Drop a comment and tell me which town you'd actually be brave enough to spend a night in. And if it's Two Guns, well, good luck. You're going to need it.